Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ogenewaro Jacovo. I'm the director of the Center for the African Diaspora, Sacred Music and Musicians. Also, to our audience on YouTube, I say you are welcome to this program. The Center for the African Diaspora, Sacred Music and Musician is a national hub for the collection, coordination, dissemination, performance, archiving, and promotion of research on African sacred music of the African diaspora. I welcome you to the first lecture in the series titled The Georgia and Nolan Payton Distinguished Lecture in African Diaspora Sacred Music. The Georgia and Nolan Payton Distinguished Lecture in African Music, or conceived as African Sacred Music, is designed to identify and promote scholars who have distinguished themselves in the study of African sacred music. This year's lecture aired in February and is going to be in every February starting from this year. Is specifically intended to generate a pathway for gospel music and African spirituality songs and provoke new thought in its research of the African spirituality. This year, we are privileged to have Professor Joyce Jackson to give this year's lecture. I will give her bio. Professor Joyce Mary Jackson is the chair of the Department of Geography and Anthropology and the former director of African and African American Studies, and holds the James J. Parsons Endowed Professorship at Louisiana State University. Jackson is also the CEO and founder of a non-profit organization called Cultural Crossroad Incorporated. She earned a PhD from from Indiana University, Bloomington, in folklore and ethnomusicology. And our core research centers on African and the African diaspora performance studies, sacred music and secular rituals, and cultural community sustainability. Our research and publications have scanned the genres of gospel, blues, and traditional jazz, including the production of several documentary recordings and their interpretative linear notes, published by the Smithsonian Folkways Recording, Capitol Recording Corporation, and the Louisiana Folklife Recording Series. She has also authored many scholarly works, including Life in the Village, a cultural memory of the Fanzaneville community, and curated numerous exhibitions with J. Nash Potter, the documentary photographer. Most recently, a documentary film titled Easter Rocks was premiered at the Ethnography Festival in Paris, France. So let's welcome Professor Jackson to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Ojakaro, for that generous introduction. I'd like to say good afternoon, and I'm very happy to be here at Cal State University in Dominguez Hill. I had a very good welcoming from the dean, Dean Tim Karan, and we found out that we had many friends, mutual friends from Louisiana, and that we are also alumni from LSU. So that was just good, nice greeting today. And we also talked about the horrible, I wouldn't say horrible, but the wonderful weather we had a few weeks ago in Louisiana. Very phenomenal for us. I have to say that I'm really excited to be here because also I remember when you were actually looking for a director of the center. And to me, it was just exciting to know that there was actually a center for African diaspora, sacred music and musicians. which is kind of like what I do, right? So to have a center for that was just really exciting. So again, I'm happy to be here. I wanted to just talk about a little of my research that is in the African diaspora, and basically with sacred music and rituals. And I've been doing this for quite some time now, and this sort of, this particular, well, you might say I launched my ritual studies from my homeland, which is in Louisiana, and just went on to some other areas from there. But I've, gotten just a lot of response from some of the work that I've done and how I related back to Africa and, of course, in my home of Louisiana. So today I would like to just share some of that with you and just to, to hear some of your responses and questions. So I will talk and then I will show the documentary, very short documentary that I've done with this research, and then afterwards we can do a Q&A session. Thank you. As I said, I started from home, which is Louisiana for me. I grew up in the sanctuary of a Black Baptist church, where women were always in the majority in terms of attendance, feeling the spirit, or you might say shouting, and ritual performativity. By supporting and nurturing one of the most crucial spaces of creativity, resistance, and rejuvenation of African American people, the Black church. The Black women are in large part responsible for the continuance in cultural and spiritual rituals in the church, and we will look at that in looking at this particular ritual of the Easter rock. It is a peculiar irony of the Black church that while not all but many men and women of various denominations are still solidly installing Black men in the upper realms of privilege and power, women are still consigned to subordinate positions. And these churches that I'm talking about are small churches that were usually based on the plantation system, came out of the plantation system. The one that I was working with all those years was a plantation church. And so they are small churches, and the women are still, consigned to subordinate positions in many of those churches. And so I was looking at that aspect as well. So sort of, them actually challenging authority and pulling from a well of Africanist cultural performance practices in doing so. The dancing, singing, shouting, and exhaling to forge a personal relationship with God. But the Black folk church is already a delineated performance venue in which pastor and congregation engage in a spirited performance which undulates with oratory, poetry, rhythm, music, dance, and shouting. And in essence, a sacred but dramatic theatrical ritual. And that was, some of the ways that I look at the differences in a folk church and, you might say just a regular church. And it doesn't, denomination is not the key. It's not whether it's a Baptist or Pentecostal or, whatever the denomination is, it doesn't matter. What matters is the ritual inside that particular church. So many of the ritual practices which we commonly associate with the Black folk church, such as freely structured services, dance, improvisational music, emotional and musical delivery of style and sermons and prayers, and spontaneous verbal and nonverbal responses from preachers and congregations. So all of this has essentially emerged from African values and aesthetics. Denominations and affiliations, again, is secondary to the ritual in the Black folk church. So in essence, it's the type, again, it's the type of ritual determines if a church is folk or not. So although the impact of the folk church within African American communities is richly documented since the early 60s, this study is sort of like a living testament to the unique ritual in rural communities in Louisiana that maintains its identity and strength through the women of the community. Now, this particular ritual that I'm looking at is called the Easter rock. And it's a ritual that has two distinct frames. And as I will emphasize later, African influences are found in a synchronized form, blended with diverse non-African icons in a unique configuration. Now, in the old Ship of Zion, which is the name of a manuscript, a book that Professor Walter F. Pitts published, delineates this binary structure that persists either in their original or modified form in the Black Atlantic world. Through the earlier labor of Pitts and others, it is affirmed that the African roots of African American religion and culture were never fully nor effectively severed by slavery. Their existence challenged the inevitability of day-to-day subordination. Now, another thing that I really want to emphasize is the performance modalities, you might say. So I'm also exploring how Black women, through the maintenance of these binary and ritual structures, operate radical Africanist performance modalities in the folk church, which challenge church patriarchy, but also helps with church sustainability. And although this ritual is not the exclusive domain of women, men can participate, but it is one that achieves its fullest expression and vibrancy by the women of the church in the region, or the churches in the region, because they come together from various churches to this one particular church. And by extension, I'll show how Black women have reconfigured the ritual icons from what I believe to be Bakongo icons and Christian icons to make the ritual palatable to Christian beliefs. And this is due to the fact that it is a pre-emancipation ritual. In other words, it was going on during the Civil War, as well as esoteric to the Baptists and, for that matter, to the Christian faith. Because, at the time, Baptists, were not doing these type of rituals. So they brought it into the Baptist church to make it palatable to them. So they sort of changed some of those aspects that we look at in the folk church and made them palatable to the Christian side. So to draw on historic, and some of the things that I've looked at during the course of this work would be historical records, of course, in the work that I've done in the field, ethnographic field work in that particular community. And, of course, years of personal observations and participation in the Easter Rock itself. I was a participant observer there in the Baptist church. And this is the area called Winsboro, Louisiana, which is in the northern part of the state, about 30 miles from Monroe, if you know anything about the state of Louisiana. But these are the things that I use to work with this information that I was gathering from my field site. Another thing I want to talk about is the role of women within the church. And because of the prominence of women in Easter Rock ceremonies, I look at women's roles as dynamic agents of growth, change, and continuity in the church. And my offering here responds to dominant meta-narratives about African American religion and patriarchy by examining how women shape and redefine their status with respect to the development of new and reconfigurations of old iconic symbolic representations and organizational possibilities, resulting in various concepts of authority and power. And the location of these discrete moments within ritual musical performance where women find agency in an otherwise male-dominated cultural system. It provides an alternative lens through which to theorize authority and power within the Black folk church. Here, Black church women are not passive minions of Black male church leadership, but rather active agents in the cultivation of female authority through developing what James C. Scott calls hidden transcripts. That this source of empowerment emerges within performance highlights the generative power of ritual often associated with diasporic traditions. So we have, and just to mention just a few of the earliest studies before me, it was only like 3 articles that I found as I was doing my lit review, of course. And the first one was in the 1940s, where the Easter Rock it's called the Easter Rock, a Louisiana Negro ceremony. And these were folklores, the Seals, husband and wife team, that observed the ritual 3 times in Concordia Parish, which is different from the one that I worked with. But just to show you that it was moving around different churches in that area, in various areas in the northern part of Louisiana. But they talked about Easter Rock as one of those pagan rites, clothed in Christian symbolism, which are not altogether uncommon among Negroes of the South, and that is a quote from them. And so we immediately see the biases that are in the work. But why it was so important is because it's from eyewitness accounts. And so you get through all the other biases and pejorative language, and you go directly to what they were actually looking at, because you can see if, you know, these same things are going on today or during the time that I was doing the work. Harry Oster, who was actually an English professor at Louisiana State University in the 50s, became acquainted with this work, with the ritual. And he went to that same area and did some work. I think he attended just one of the ceremonies in '56, and he was in the same Concordia Parish. Had previously, been observed by the early ones, the seals. And he also talked about them as primitive elements, and he talked about, the primitive scene, prime example of acculturation in Louisiana Delta. And then there was Pete Gregory, who was a geographer, and he was doing geographical work in the area, but just happened to go to this church and see this ritual. And then so he wrote about it. And also with his writing, it was pretty much talking about it as a sort of element of voodoo. And he said that it was the only revered tradition once was the mystic dance of the practitioners of voodoo. And he made this statement with absolutely no explanation or evidence to corroborate his claim. And when I was working with the participants there, I mentioned, not to say his name, but I said, well, do you look at this as being a vestige of voodoo? And they said, oh, no, we don't have anything to do with that. And not the fact that they were not looking at it as another religion, an Afro-based religion, but they just, well, the way people normally think of voodoo during that time is something evil. And so they didn't want to be associated with voodoo because they thought it was something evil at the time. And so I asked several people about it, and I had the same response from all of them. We don't associate with that at all. And so, before they make these blanket statements, he really should have taught. And these people did not, these other earlier scholars did not really talk to the people. They didn't do a lot of, interviewing to see how they felt about what their interpretation was. So it's really important of how we represent people and how we interpret what they're doing. It's good to get that feedback and see how they feel about it. Now Janet Sturman was an ethnomusicologist that looked at it, and she talked about it as being, basically gave a detailed description of history and sort of a musical analysis of it. So she did interview some people too, as a part of her research. So that was and she was doing some research right before I did mine. So there's only like 4 things that were published about it, or a few things were in the newspaper, but just very journalist accounts of what they saw. So we find that my main premise is to focus upon the importance of ritual and how it allows us to see that women in the Black folk church base their leadership and power on direct control of these ceremonial and ritual events, rather than exercise overt resistance against gender domination. Again, looking at the hidden transcripts within, of course they're not saying all this, being obvious about it, but this is what is happening at the ritual, and we can see that, if you've had a chance to look at them for a number of times like I did. So giving a little of the ethnographic gaze on the rock, just to set the scene, and I'm going to show the film a little bit. I just want to give you this background of what I'm doing, and then just to set the scene for you before you see the documentary. It's in the town of Winsboro. It's located on Louisiana Highway 15. It's about 150 miles from Baton Rouge, which is the capital city of Louisiana. about 37 miles from Monroe, Louisiana, and 55 miles from Natchez, Mississippi. So you can sort of like get an idea of where that area is in northern Louisiana, which is very close to Natchez. And then I also checked to see if any type of these rituals were going on in Mississippi, and they said no. Most of the people that I asked had never heard of it before, except within the northern part of Louisiana. So, and it was at the original True Light Baptist Church, again, which is located on Highway 4 in the back of the town. And again, it is a plantation church. That was a plantation, and the plantation owner said, you can still, use the church as long as I don't have to put any money in it to refurbish anything. That's on you. You can use it as long as it's standing, but when it starts falling, that's on you. So that's what they did. They used that church, and they kind of moved it from the back of the plantation up into the highway, the front. And they used that church. And it was important to have a church with wooden floors because, rhythm and the drum is very important. But after emancipation, they still used the wooden floor as the drum. So you can hear the beats and the rhythms that they're doing through the dance, but you can hear it on the floor of the church. So it's very important for them to stay with this wooden church because many of the churches that are built today, of course, have carpet and, other floors that you really can't hear the rhythms. And so it was very important for them to remain at a church where they could hear the rhythms on the floor of the wooden floor. And they maintained their church as much as they could, and did repairs and, again, and they would have carpet on it, but it was carpet that you could remove. And during the Easter time, when they would have the ritual, they would actually pull up the carpet and push the pews back towards the wall so they'd have the center, because the center of the church was very important for the ritual. Now, in my observations over several years, I found that the ritual was never incorporated in a regular church service. It was always done as an aside of the church service. You'll do a church service fine, but most of the time these were held at night, and the church services are held during the daytime, but it was held usually because it's always the eve of Easter. So it would be the Saturday night before Easter. And they're not just for one congregation, not just the congregation at the church, but other churches in the whole region, in the whole area would come and to celebrate. Well, they were celebrating a risen Christ, so they would come and celebrate there. It's organized and maintained by women, and they do everything, including baking the cakes, mending and or making white dresses, purchasing oil for the lamps, boiling and coloring Easter eggs, or purchasing candy eggs, spring cleaning and decorating the church. And preparing the children was also very important because they would bring the kids in to help clean up the church, do the spring cleaning, and they would work on them and how to do the steps in the ritual. So it was very important to get the youth involved. And the person that I work with, Ms. Hattie Addison, was very instrumental at that because a lot of the parents, if they wouldn't bring the kids out, she would go around to each house and pick them up herself, or send some of her relatives, go pick up this and go pick up that one. So she wanted to make sure that the children were involved. She knew that she had carried it on from her mother, and her mother carried it on from her mother. So there were 3 generations already that was working with, you might say, the modern version of all of this. So she wanted to make sure that after she got to a situation where she couldn't do it anymore, that someone else would take it on after she finished. So it was very important to get the youth involved. And so that was Hattie Addison. And so she'd always say that, when her mother was, not able to do everything, she would take up the slack. And so she was working and helping her mother with this from the beginning, as long as she can remember. So she had inherited it from her mother a long time. So again, it's an intergenerational ritual. And so I visited the homes of several people. Most of my interviews were done in their homes. And so you were able to see, when we're doing ethnographic research, when you want to see the person's environment, if at all possible, because of course that tells you a lot about the person that is doing this or the group of people that is doing this. So that was very important. And they all did some things that, various days before the ritual, preparations had to be made. And so all the things that I've already named were going on several days. And when I went in with the film crew, we went in several days before the ritual to see, to put it all in context and to see what everybody was doing, how they were preparing for this major ritual in the community. It was a communal ritual. So looking at the first frame of the rituals I talked about before, the binary frames. The first frame, structured frame of the ritual, is a woman who directs the ritual, but she does not do so from the pulpit. Even during this female-driven occasion, the minister is still the only one in the pulpit. The mistress of ceremony leads the congregation in a typical devotion and worship service, but it's at another mic away from the main pulpit. So you have things that are going on in the first frame that are, it might be gospel, it's more modern things like gospel music and things like hymns, and although hymns are not modern, but these are also the European aspect in that first frame. Many of the hymns come in, anthems, and things, published music that is being performed, and along with sometimes gospel music. Could be quartets, could be soloists, small groups. So all this happens in the first part of the ritual. In the second part, when you have a lining out song, one that we call also long meter or Dr. Watts, it denotes that, okay, we're about to move into the second frame. And the second frame, which was basically the African frame, because that is when you get the shout songs and the spirituals, and the things like that, the dancing, some people going into trance, all that happens in the second frame. And you'll see some of that in the documentary. And so you have this procession of women that will come in to lead the procession. You'll have them putting things on it. The old when saints come marching in is one song that they use to just march in and put things on the table, which is right in the center of the church. And then you have a procession to bring in lamps and to bring in the cakes and to bring in Easter eggs and the blood of Jesus, which is punch, red punch. And so all of this is going on the table. And all of this also happens in that second frame. But you get the differences in the music is one of the main things. The main things about it is, of course, the music and the icons that they're putting on the table. And the icons, one of the main ones that you will see is this round banner which represents the cross. Now, it's very easy for them to use a perpendicular cross, but for some reason, and that goes again back to the African traditions, they use this secular icon to represent the cross. So you'll see all at the cross with these flowing streams of colorful paper. But so you find all these things. The kerosene lamp will be set on the table. And all these things are very symbolic of, and I will let them tell you, I won't go through all of that because they will tell you all of this on the documentary. But they also, in the music, the tempo accelerates, and you have the songs change, and the rockers quicken. And so you can see all of these things happening that are very different in the second frame than what you saw in the first frame. So you have, the rockers will come in by themselves, and then later on they will also involve other people or invite other people to come in. I'm going to just go into the documentary right now, and maybe I'll have a few words to just conclude things at the end, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
In
person in the northeast Delta section of Louisiana states that they are going to a rock and roll dance is a default expectation. On the contrary, they are referring to what is known as the Easter rock, a religious ritual that is performed to celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In Winsboro, Louisiana, a generation is trying to preserve what their mothers and grandmothers taught them about sacred ritual.
My grandmother told me about the rock. Her parent rocked before her.
To the casual observer, this may look like regular secular dance steps, but they are very sacred, with roots dating back to the pre-Civil War era during slavery.
And he be dancing, we put him out of there. We don't want no dancing, we want you to rock, not be dancing, you know.
The older women, who can remember rocking in their youth, hold the ritual with great reverence. And it is the women of the church that organize the rock each year.
I am the bread that fed 5,000. I am the bread.
Mrs. Beulah Ross is a longtime participant of the rock. She shares her memories of what the elders told her about the creation of this ritual.
About this rock, it was told to me that how they form and how they start rocking. The old people would sit down and listen to each one talk about Jesus, coming back again. And it was told to me that one tell of them, I don't know which one it was, Elijah or Elisha, when he got the news that Jesus was on his way back, he got so rejoiced, that he just started rocking and shouting, rocking and shouting. And so I guess, that's where the rock part come in.
The ring shout is a black religious dance, usually done in a counterclockwise movement and has strong African performance practices. Historically, the dance consists of movement in a circle by a group or band of singers, where their feet never crossed and usually were not lifted from the ground. These dances were performed in praise houses, slave quarters, and consequently in the black folk church. Many accounts exist in the literature of the antebellum period, and depending on the region, there were different variations on the basic theme. In the Easter Rock circular ritual in Winsboro, a number of questions come to mind. Why do 12 women dress in white and are referred to as saints? Why do they place 12 cakes and 10 lanterns on the table? Why are they circling a table with one person, who is sometimes the song leader, carrying a banner with colorful streamers? Ms. Beulah Ross explains what the icons of the rock symbolize, according to what community elders shared with her.
Oh, yes, indeed. The rock was real spiritual. After, when they formed the table with all the cakes and the lamps and eggs and different things like that, all of it on there represents something. It wasn't a table just sitting up there being pretty, It represents something. The eggs, they had a basket of eggs. The basket of eggs represent that Jesus, when he rose from the tomb. And rose from the stone. And the 12 cakes. Now, I don't know, Sister Jones, she give another number of cakes, but I was always taught that the table's supposed to have 12 cakes on it. And those 12 cakes represent the 12 disciples. And I was told that the table would have 10 lambs, and that would represent the 10 virgins. 5 was wise and 5 was foolish.
Most people agreed that the circular banner represents the cross, but no one knew why it was a circle with streamers flowing.
Now the banner, I don't know too much about the banner, but I'm quite sure that it represents, must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free. No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. So I'm quite sure that's what that banner represents, the cross of Jesus.
In earlier days, the rock lasted all night.
After the program, they would start the rock at 9 o'clock. And then they would rock until 12. And they would have a break, and they would eat and drink, and then they would start rocking again. Now, it had been time that some of them old peoples would rock all night long to 4 days that morning, because as they was told that the sun on Easter Sunday morning, that the sun comes up shouting. And I guess if you can pay attention and get up early enough, to watch the sun on Easter morning, you can probably can see it, just they're shouting.
If you want your body healed, tell me what you want.
Several types of sacred songs would be used in the program before the actual rock ritual began.
They'd lose long meters, and they would use the do, re, sol, re, ti, do, and they would use different solos. Whatever the person felt like singing that you would call to sing.
However, during the rock ritual, there are only certain select songs that are performed.
They rocked off of David. David was a clear song they rocked off, and they rocked off of Bread.
Even though the Easter rock ritual is commemorating the resurrection of Christ, the song chant, "O David," is deemed suitable for the occasion. In essence, enslaved blacks had an Old Testament bias. Among their revered heroes, about whom they sang constantly, were Moses, Daniel, Jonah, Gabriel, and David. All the themes were conceptually dealing with good against bad, the weaker conquering the stronger. This song has been maintained because of its biblical and real-life meaning to enslaved Africans and to modern-day African Americans.
Really, when you're rocking to a risen Savior, you just think about what you're doing. And it takes really control of you when you're doing it, when it's really done right.
Another tradition with similar performance practices with a ring shout is in coastal Georgia, Bolden, which is in McIntosh County. The ring shout here in Georgia demonstrates the African continuum. Clearly, the roots of the Easter rock worship ritual date to slavery in the South. It is generally known that at the time of emancipation, slaves were still overwhelmingly African in culture. Sterling Stuckey, a leading historian, has explored the folklore of American slaves by examining it through a cross-cultural Pan-African lens. In his seminal work, Slave Culture, he establishes what he refers to as the Black ethos in slavery. Essentially, he substantiates the centrality of an African ancestral ritual, the circle dance, to the Black religious and artistic experience. He writes, "The majority of Africans brought to North America to be enslaved were from the central and western areas of Africa, from Congo, Angola, Nigeria, Dahomey, Togo, the Gold Coast, and Sierra Leone. In these areas, an integral part of religion and culture was movement in a ring during ceremonies honoring the ancestors. There is, in fact, Sterling Stuckey suggests substantial evidence for the importance of the ancestral function of the circle in West Africa. But the circle ritual imported by Africans from the Congo region was so powerful in this elaboration of a religious vision that it contributed disproportionately to the centrality of the circle in slavery. The use of the circle for religious purposes in slavery was so consistent and profound that one could argue that it was what gave form and meaning to Black religion and art. Circular dances are also linked to the burial ceremonies, which is the most important of all African rituals. According to art historian Robert F. Thompson, in Makongo burial ceremonies, mourners moved around the body of the deceased in a counterclockwise direction, with their feet imprinting a circle on the earth. I recently observed 3 funerals in the coastal region of Ghana, in Wo, between Keita and Nloga, all of which included some form of circular dancing or processing in relationship to the deceased body. The funeral of a 108-year-old man was dense with circular movements and individuals, groups portraying ancestors and individuals doing animal sacrifices, all moving around the deceased in a counterclockwise direction.
Bread, bread, the living bread, I am the bread. Bread, bread, the living bread, I am the bread. I am the bread.
The Easter Rock songs are traditionally a combination of the African American version of the lined out along meter hymns and the folk spirituals and chants used specifically for shouts, or in this case, rocks.
Tell me what's the matter now, oh, baby. Lord, I'm in trouble now, oh, baby. Lord, I'm in trouble now.
The spirituals and chants were built on the form so common to West African songs, a leading call and response. They also shared many points of stylistic similarity, overlapping of leader and chorus, extended repetition of short melodic phrases, a cappella, layered rhythms, improvisation of text and melody, and percussion emphasis and bodily movement. Focus upon the importance of ritual allows us to see that women in the Black folk church based their leadership and power in direct control of ceremonial and ritual events rather than exercise overt resistance against gender domination. While there are a number of studies on African diasporic musical religious traditions, these studies seldom offer a gendered reading of power relations inherent in the performance of such musical rituals. However, because of the prominence of women in rocking ceremonies here, I observe women's role as dynamic agents of growth, change, and continuity in the church. The women shape and redefine their status with respect to the development of new symbolic and organizational possibilities, resulting in various concepts of authority and power.
Okay, that was. Okay. Thank you. That was the end of the documentary, and I just do maybe just a closing statement, looking at the binary transcripts, and the majority of the icons, as you can see, are Eurocentric. However, the most striking and powerful ones, the music and the banner or representation of the cross, are Afrocentric. And of course, the circle. The calendrical time of year, the Lenten season, is always when the rock is done. So we just can look at the possibilities here of the women in these churches. And so while my primary aim was not really the excavation of African survivals, but rather the explication of the actual character and diversity of the icons in this ritual is manifest among African American women. Ultimately, I believe that much of the originality and special richness of the Easter Rock ritual rests in the fact that it is forged by women of African ancestry in the crucible of oppression. First, during slavery, and later on the patterns of segregation, discrimination, and economic disparities. Only powerful African cultural elements were retained and effectively mobilized as part of African American women's response to spirituality and life. Thus, they have their hidden transcriptions. Thank you. Okay, at this time, we could have a Q&A if you'd like. I think I have some time here. No questions, comments?
Thank you for the amazing presentation and the documentary. My name is Obinna. I'm a Nigerian. I teach here at CSUDH. It's good to see my culture more or less being depicted the way you just did it, because in Africa, we love music. We love dancing. And these two things are part of the things that help us to overcome challenges and problems, even long before the Christian era in Africa. When you hear of Afro beats, for instance, those are actually real African music that have been modified over the years and translated into different languages and different cultures, but going around the whole world today. We dance a lot, and actually in our religion, African religion, women are more or less at the pivot, the epitome of religiosity in Africa. In any church you go into, you will see about 3 women to 1 man. Because they are the pillars of the systems. They are the pillars of the culture. They are the pillars of Christianity, African religion, even Muslims, and other different religions we have in Africa. So it's good to see what's happening in Louisiana. And when I cast my mind back to African cultures, there's much difference. Secular dancing is still ongoing in Africa today, because that's the way they dance. They dance in circles with somebody at the center, not a table, but a human being at the center guiding the dancing systems. So these are slight modifications of the African culture. Thank you for that presentation.
Oh, sure. I'd have to say this, too, that in the work that I've done in that area, most people think of New Orleans as having all the rituals, but they're actually all over the state. And this is one particular one that is only happening in the northern part. They don't know anything about this. When I talk to people in New Orleans, they don't know anything about the Easter Rock. So, we brought it there and showed it to them. It's been at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. But the other thing that is still puzzling and that I'm still looking at and digging through archives and stuff and looking at the plantation records is to figure out which ethnic groups from Africa were in that area. At those specific plantations, because there was several plantations that had these, rituals. But it's been very difficult to find out, which ones, or what ethnic groups, if they were Yoruba, Igbo, or Wolof, or, from what country in Africa they were from. So I'm still working on this. It's an ongoing research project. But I'm glad to have your comments. Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions?
Yes. My name is Gurpreet Kaur. I'm also a faculty with School of Public Health and Health Sciences, just like Dr. Obinna. So just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much. It was very informative. I just loved listening to you and also watching the documentary. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here and for the comments.
If you're trying to locate the dancing steps that you use in documentary, those are actually mostly either Efik or Igbo. Those dancing steps are from the Efik region, which is the Akwa Ibom axis. Akwa Ibom Calabar axis of Nigeria. Those are the dancing steps you depicted in the documentary, so they're mostly Efik.
Okay, the Igbo.
Igbo and Efik.
And Efik?
E-F-I-K.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that information.
Thank you very much, Jackson. It was very, very, very exciting presentation, you know, and also to see the documentary. I just have a quick question. What happened to the breads, to the cakes after the performance? What happens?
Good question. Well, you know, as one of the ladies said, that this, the earlier aspects of this, people stayed all night long. So, in between, they would stop and have a feast. Not only did they have the cake and all of that, but they had fried chicken and potato salad and the works. So you would eat, you'd have dinner, and then, sort of get your nourishment and go back to doing the Easter rock. But these days, they don't really stay all night anymore. They may stop at, maybe about 10, 11 o'clock at night. But when they stop, then they offer the food to the congregants, that basically came from around the community. And so they have, a feast. And they eat the cake, they drink the punch, which at one time was, now it's just like red punch, fruit punch. At one time, it was actually homemade wine. So, but the cakes were actually homemade, but now they get them from Walmart. So, but yeah, the congregation eats the food. And they have a, fellowship afterwards. I mean, I made that trip many times. It's 150 miles from Baton Rouge. But not only when I started telling other people about it, other people were coming from Baton Rouge, New Orleans, because they had never seen anything like that before. So we had people not just from that region, but from other parts of the state. And, they've been on the world, what was that? In New York, they do the world music broadcast. And some New Yorkers came in and filmed it one year, so they were just coming from different areas. So they were really happy to get the cake and punch at the end. Yes, Tim? How you doing?
Writers like Frank Wilderson, who really imagine African-American experiences in the U.S. today as being ruptured or broken from an African legacy and an African past. So it was so powerful to see this unbroken past and what it meant. And again, a matriarchal passing of these traditions over generations. So in your research, did you find out more about what that means for folks and sort of the importance of that legacy?
Yes, and there were a number of writers who thought that the institution of slavery was so harsh that many of the traditions were wiped away. And not only white writers, but black too. E. Franklin Frazier, which was an author, well, he was basically a religious scholar, but he was a historian. He used to talk about in his earlier days that, we just don't have that many traditions anymore because slavery was so harsh, it just wiped them all out. Well, that's not true. And we find that there are so many traditions that were maintained from slavery. Yes, it was a harsh, very traumatic situation, but one of the things that kept them going and kept them being strong were the traditions that were maintained. And yes, on the transatlantic slave trade, you can't bring over your instruments and you can't bring over, some other aspects of your religiosity, but you can bring over your belief system. You can bring over your folk tales and your stories and your songs and your rhythms, you know, those things that are intangible, but they're very important. They were more important than some of the other things that we could see. But those were the things that were maintained, and they were maintained because of a reason. You see, well, why people hold on to certain traditions, because they are there for a purpose. And that purpose was to get us through the issues that we were dealing with in the enslaved period, then after, you know, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation, and all of that. But it was our traditions that maintained the culture. So these things that were maintained, you could see the stronger ones that were maintained was the ones that came from Africa in these, you know, in these rituals. And this was just one, the Easter Rock ritual, but I've seen them also in other areas, like in the Gullah and the South Carolina Sea Islands. The people in those areas were isolated. So they were able to maintain a lot of their African traditions because they were not really acculturating as fast as people in other areas were that were living in other societies. But because it was isolated, that's why the Geechee and the Gullah, which people seem, you know, the same thing, have maintained theirs too. And they were actually brought together this summer in New Orleans and other places. They brought those to the Easter Rock group from Monroe, from Winsboro, Louisiana, and the Geechee and the Gullah from Dorian, Georgia, and other areas on the Sea Island coast. And so they brought them together, and their traditions were so similar. And when we brought them to the Smithsonian some years back, and the Smithsonian just happened to have at that festival South African religious groups too. And I made it possible to bring them all together because I'm over here looking at the South Africans do their thing, and then the Easter Rock. So it was just, you know, I had to bring them together. I say, look, y'all, you know, and they had never seen anybody before from either one of the areas, and I brought them together, and they meshed together and were doing some of the same steps. I mean, it was just phenomenal that, you know, that connection that was still there. And then, you know, from South Africa. Of course, we know that most of the people that were brought in to the U.S. were brought in from West Africa. But in, you know, in other areas of Africa too, you know, you got these similar traditions, and they were brought together, and they were just so excited to see each other. They couldn't even speak the same languages, but they spoke the language of tradition. And they saw that they were carrying on some of the same things, you know, across the Atlantic. So that was really a profound situation for the Easter Rockers to be exposed to the South Africans, and the South Africans be exposed to them to see what is being carried on from Africa. And it's not. They weren't even from West Africa, they were from South Africa. So, yeah, so those traditions have been maintained because of the value and the purpose through the years, you know, helping to maintain your, you know, your self-worth and why you're maintained and why you happen to be here that long. So, yeah, it's very important. And it happens, you know. Most people think you see all this in New Orleans, but it's in other areas too of the South. New Orleans, I would think is, you know, it is the most Africanist city in the U.S., but it's not just New Orleans that maintains those traditions. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I have a question from online, and Adeolu Ogunsanya is asking, apart from carrying the secular representation of the cross, what other roles is assigned to the male figure in the event?
He said that apart from carrying the cross, the representation of the cross, and it's not always done by men. Sometimes women do. Just on this particular one, it was done by men. So men do, contribute. They do participate too. But he said, what are the roles that men play? Well, some of the men actually join in the rock as the ritual part, the moving around the circle, and some of them help with preparing the church. And so there are roles that they do. They're just not the central part of coordination and doing the rock. And it's just that the women have just taken it over to do it and to maintain it, the continuity of it. But men do help, they help. But it's not a major role that men play. Because the men are, they're the ones that really are running the church. And so women say, no, this is our part. This is what we're going to do to keep these traditions going and to keep that continuity of how the ritual is done. Yeah, but the men do play their part. They're significant. They do play their part. I actually did interview some men too, to get their version, their perspective of the ritual and the part that they play. So they're the supportive part, you might say. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Jackson. What an informative presentation, and our campus is so very fortunate to have you come and give just a wealth of information on this topic, the Easter Rock, because I must say I was unfamiliar with it, but I can go now with more knowledge of the African diaspora and how this is still influential in our culture today. I just want to do a little bit more deep dive, because when we think about culture and things like that, were you able to make any attribute to how food, the food presentation and everything, how that might have devolved as the culture evolved here in the United States and specifically in New Orleans? Because New Orleans has a food culture all on its own. So I'm just curious about the tradition of food in this, because it just seemed really more westernized around that culture. Can you just, I don't know if you were able to make any attributes to that in your research, but what a beautiful presentation again. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, food is, as we know, is very important. And the cakes actually represent the unleavened bread at the Last Supper, and here representing the 12 disciples. But the table is actually the altar. And so, there's always some type of food on the altar, and the food represents something. Now, I'm not sure why initially that they use cakes, because, I've gotten various things. They say, well, it's a cake and it's big and, we can feed a lot of people and, it's good and they will enjoy having the fellowship afterwards. And, so they just decided to use that instead of just putting bread on the altar. Normally it would be bread. Probably was bread during the antebellum period, because they didn't have, they didn't have the access to bake cakes and all of that, so it probably was just bread. But over the years, you can see certain things evolved. And they would say, well, we used to do it like this, but now we do it like this. So it's the involvement of other ideas coming into, modern times, and the fact that they just did the cakes, again, because they're big and they serve a lot of people. And that's what they wanted to do for the fellowship. Yeah, but yeah, the food is very important on altars. Mm-hmm. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
I would say thank you all for joining us online and also for joining us in person. I would say we are very lucky this year to have Professor Jackson, Joyce Jackson, in our presence. And the lecture was really, really illuminating, and it shed a lot of light into what we do at the center. Professor Jackson, I say welcome to Cal State Dominguez Hills, and we look forward to have more presentation. Stay tuned to our programs, and we look forward to the next year's lecture. Thank you very much.